please join me in welcoming Jessie Knight.
Thank you, Darren, for that kind introduction. Welcome to San Diego Gas and Electric's Energy Innovation Center. This is a phenomenal place, and I hope you take advantage of the time to go through here. It's a fitting place to hold this conference, as it's the venue for the future world of energy and environmental sustainability. And this conference is a tremendous venue for all of us to learn from experts, share concepts, and advance the ball toward keeping our families, companies, and the nation more secure. There are scores of people to thank, but before I do that, it's essential that we acknowledge the SOEC Foundation. These are the folks who put on the programs and put on this conference, and I'd like to give them a round of applause, in addition to the great team from San Diego Gas and Electric who helped pull this 2 days together. So warm round of applause. But in the end, for them, it's only 2 days of putting on a program like this, because they're working the rest of the year on some very, very important areas to further the cause and the mission of ensuring that we have a safe, secure environment for cybersecurity in our country and in our region. First and foremost are their foundational workshops, which are the business-to-business cyber education programs that they offer. And as cited in a recent TrustWave report, the #1 way for businesses that they can protect themselves is to offer education programs for their employees. And secondly, the foundation focuses on youth and family programs. And I think you all remember that the SOEC was the first organization in the United States to offer a cybersecurity program for the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. This year, they are expanding that program and integrating a comprehensive program with the YMCA of San Diego County. And lastly, and certainly a very important feature of this expansion, is to help our seniors, which is a highly vulnerable group that are often left to fend for themselves without cybersecurity instruction. So SOEC teams have regular workshops for seniors and are going to be expanding in this area too. I could go on and on and on, but you may be asking yourself, why is all of this is important? It's important because cybercrime is on the rise, and as you're going to learn over the next 2 days, companies, large and small, have to step up and get proactive in taking measures to protect themselves and protect their communities and their customers. It's a shared responsibility and something that we all must participate and do. According to datalossdb.org, an organization that tracks breaches, just as of this week, a whopping 1,076 breaches have occurred. We have already surpassed 2011 numbers. So what you should do and how you should do it, these are never-ending questions that have to be revisited time and time again if we are going to be safe in our future. We have over 26 experts from the field of cybersecurity at this conference, and they're here to share with you and offer a wealth of experience, knowledge, and understanding. And as you increase your knowledge by learning from them, I hope that over the next 2 days you take the time to learn more about the SOEC Foundation and its mission. Together, we can make San Diego a safe cyber harbor and a flourishing regional center of cyber excellence that will help bring exciting new technologies, jobs, and more to this wonderful region. I look forward to seeing all of you and meeting you, and look forward to the award ceremony that we'll have this afternoon at 4:30. And welcome to San Diego and to the Energy Innovation Center.
Okay, so good morning. How's everybody doing? How many people are from San Diego? Raise your hand. Good, thank you for raising your hand. How many people from Michigan? Anyone here from Michigan? Hey, my wife is here. My wife is from Michigan. Okay, so what I want to make sure is that I can get my PowerPoint up. I don't see it, so there might be a technical, oh, is it up? Okay, oh wow, so that's me in the middle, and then those are the slides. Okay, so I have to tell you in advance, well, 2 things I want to say. I love San Diego, and probably like some of you, I actually found myself here many, many moons ago. I was in the Navy, and so I'm a Navy guy. Don't hold that against me if you're in the Marine Corps or something like that. The Marines are part of the Navy. But so I had very, very fond memories of being stationed out here on on the USS Truxtun and North Island and a whole bunch of other places. So anyway, it's great to be back home. A little bit about what we're going to do today. As you probably know, I'm a numbers wonk, and that's why I'm in research. And even though with that great background, really fundamentally, I'm an accountant. I count things. I know how to count. And a lot of what we do in Ponemon Institute is we try to break complex issues into small components, and we like to measure these fuzzy things like the cost of a cybercrime or the cost of a data breach. Now, admittedly, the work that we do, it's very hard to do it. And the work that we do is controversial because there are some people who say, well, we could do it better, so do it better. You know, we're always looking for ways of improving our research, and we love hearing from you. We love getting phone calls. We're very lonely in northern Michigan where we're located. So when we get a call from someone from San Diego and they said, I have an idea of improving your study, it is phenomenal. That just makes our life very happy. Is that true, Susan? Yeah, so we actually do talk to you. We don't have a robot talking to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk around because that's the way I am, and I'm going to go through some very, very cryptic, a lot of numbers and stuff, and I'm going to try to give you the theory, the background behind some of those numbers. The title of this study is called the 2012 Cost of Cybercrime. This is our third annual study. It is sponsored by HP. Now, just understand, sponsorship doesn't mean it's controlled by HP. HP is wonderful to work with, but this is done entirely independently by our institute. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, now I should be pointing to something. There, oh, went too far. So, okay, I think I got this under control. So yeah, I'm a low high-tech guy. So again, our institute is dedicated to privacy, data protection, and information security. And as Darren mentioned, we've been in existence now in our 11th year. So we've been at it for a while. And I've been in this industry sort of, more or less, for like nearly 40 years. That makes me an ancient character. So let me just tell you a little bit about some of our key findings. We're going to go do a deeper dive into each of these, but number one, not too surprisingly, this year we find that cybercrimes continue to be very costly. And in fact, the average for a sample of 56 participating companies was about $8.9 million based on activity-based costings. That's not chump change. That's a pretty significant amount. But we'll talk a little bit about the range. Some organizations spend a lot more, and other organizations spend a lot less. Probably another surprising finding where we will do a deeper dive is about the relationship between organizational size and cost. Not too surprisingly, the cost is correlated to size. The larger the organization, the larger the cost. Well, duh. Well, but when you basically scale size, it basically has a different result that smaller size organizations on a per capita basis actually spend more dollars than larger organizations. So we'll actually show you those results as well. Cybercrimes are intrusive and a common occurrence. Each year we try to track successful attacks. We use that term consistently and constantly throughout our research. What do we mean by a successful attack? Well, a successful attack is an attack that infiltrates a network or an enterprise system. So if it bounces off your firewall, it's a problem, you don't like it, but it's not successful. When it infiltrates, it's successful. And then we have some messy issues, which we'll talk about later, like malware that morphs into something else. So we actually might be double counting. We measure malware, but we also measure other types of relationships that maybe started as malware and ended up a denial of service attack or something worse. Okay, the most costly cyber crimes are those caused by malicious insiders, malicious code, and denial of services. And in fact, those three categories account for nearly 80% of the total cost. And probably not surprising as well is the idea that a cyber attack that is not dealt with effectively in a timely manner is going to be more costly to you. And now we know this is correlated with a lot of issues, probably sunspots, but it's also correlated with the fact that organizations that have good governance practices are better at resolving the cybercrime. And we actually have some examples where organizations waited way too long and the end result was a huge amount of cost that was unnecessary. Next slide. Thank you. A little bit more about what we're going to talk about. Information theft, attacks that are focused surgically on the theft of information assets are the most difficult. And we basically notice that the type of attack has changed a little bit over time. Traditionally, the attacks were around disrupting business, denial of service. Basically, we're going to go in and we're going to slow you down. Availability becomes a problem. You have a lot of downtime. You have to recover. Sometimes it's around stealing. Revenue issues emerge. But also it's about the theft of information, which could be the theft of customer information, a data breach, or it could be intellectual property. It could be the design of a new aircraft or a missile system. That kind of information in the wrong hands is very, very, very costly. From an activity-based costing perspective, recovery and detection are the most costly internal activities. We'll talk about that as well. Now, all industries in our study fall victim to a cybercrime in our benchmark study, but there are differences. And in fact, since we've been doing this for 3 years, we find that financial service organizations are probably spending the most amount of money from an activity-based costing perspective. But utilities, energy companies, and defense contractors also are kind of on the very high end. Now, don't ask me why. We have some conjecture here, but we found that retailers and public sector organizations are on the lower end. Now, don't take that as zero, but basically there are cost differences by the type of organization. The problem with public sector, though, keep in mind that when we say public sector, that could be a whole bunch of different types of organizations. So, for example, if you're in a water supply, a water utility, right, that probably falls more into the utility side than a government organization like the Department of Treasury, for example. So keep in mind that there are there's a lot of variance because the organizations are not homogeneous when we talk about public sector organizations. Okay, I'm very happy to tell you this. Because you are doing your job, a strong security posture moderates the cost of cyber attacks. So companies that have good security are finding that the total costs are lower, but they're not zero. So even with a perfect security posture, which doesn't exist, I would hypothesize that there will be some cost. And then there are certain technologies and certain governance practices that seem to make a bigger difference in terms of moderating costs. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide, please. You're doing a great job controlling the slide. Thank you. So now we're going to go into benchmark methods and background. I told you this is like, academia stuff. Next slide. So a little bit about our study. A lot of people will say, when they call us in Michigan, because we're lonely, we get the call, we say, what can we do for you? They'll say, I really liked your study, but your sample size of 50 companies really is awful. Because, when you look at studies like, surveys of thousands of people, and we love surveys. This is not a survey. This is field-based research. This particular study took how many months, Susan? 7 months to complete, 7.5 months to complete for 56 companies. So you actually do field research because it's the only way to actually get to the cost data. If you ask people on a survey, how much are you spending on, whatever, they're going to give you an answer, but it's not going to be accurate. Now, we love surveys, but this is not survey research. It's true field-based research. And again, as I mentioned, we use a methodology called activity-based costing, which is boring, but it's really good for this type of study. It measures fuzzy activities. And it was created by a professor at Harvard University, a guy by the name of Bob Kaplan, who was actually my cost accounting professor. So he's really old at this point. He's ancient. Okay, so that's I think all we need to say about this slide. Next. Oh, look at this beautiful picture. So I'm going to be referring to some of these activities and external costs. We actually don't measure certain things in our model. Someone was really confused. They did an article, and they said, gee, I was really surprised that the cost of cybercrime was only $8.9 million because, information assets like the design of a missile system is probably worth, in the wrong hands, a couple $100 million. We don't measure the loss of the intellectual property. We actually look at just the activities, the organizational costs associated with dealing with the cybercrime, not the value of lost information. And that could be a huge number. I have to admit, we even hired 3 professors from the University of Chicago to help us in this, and they were worthless too. No, I shouldn't say they were worthless. They squiggly line research, integrals, and everything else, and I just said, my head blew up. I just couldn't take it anymore, so I said, you're fired. No, we didn't fire them, but the end result is it's just really, really hard to do, but someone will invent that, and when they do, that will be a huge contribution. So anyways, we have internal activities and external consequences, information loss, business disruption, damage or theft of property, plant, equipment. This would also include things like lost laptops, tablets, and smartphones and those kinds of things. And then, of course, revenue loss, which is a big problem. Thank you. Wow, colorful. In terms of industry, we don't control by industry, but since we're looking at results over time, and we don't actually have time series data, the second best thing that we do is we match samples. So we match by organizational size, we match by industry, and we match by a couple of other variables. But we basically know that every year that financial services slice of the pie is usually the largest, followed by technology, retail, and public sector. But then you start getting into small slices, so then it becomes real iffy when you start to predict by industry. Now, we've been doing this for 3 years, plus we actually did this study for the first time in other countries, so we could now start to see patterns by industry. And it's safe to say that financial services is, in fact, spending a larger chunk of dollars on dealing with cybercrime. Next slide. In terms of organizational size, this study, even though I made that point before about small is more costly than large on a per capita basis, we do not look at SMBs in this study. Small and medium-sized businesses are not included because we basically cap the smallest organizations as having 1,000 or more enterprise seats. Why do we do that? Well, I wish we didn't do that, but now we're still trying to match over time. We think SMBs are very interesting because there's this false belief, that in fact, if you're an SMB, you don't have a bullseye in your back. You have to be a big company with a big brand to have to deal with problems, which doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. In terms of the types of cyber attacks experienced, all of the companies, all 56 organizations in this year's benchmark study experience viruses. All experience malware, botnets, most experience malware, then botnets, web-based attacks, and then we start getting to smaller numbers, like stolen devices, malicious code, malicious insiders, phishing and social engineering and denial of service. These are kind of the frequency of the types of attacks that organizations experience. But take denial of service. The fact is, 32% of the 56 organizations experienced it, but the organization might have been the victim of a denial of service attack like 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times over the period, the field work that we're doing. So it doesn't necessarily measure the magnitude or the frequency of each of these categories. Next, thanks. In terms of the frequency, the number one is malware and viruses. They're pretty close. Then botnets. Then you start to get to smaller numbers, like 28 denial of service attacks. It gives us enough to start to analyze costs, but when we start talking about things like malicious code, malicious insiders, denial of service, these frequencies are low, but it doesn't mean it's not a problem, because which will show even one of these might be worth 1,000 malwares. You know what I mean? They're not necessarily equally costly. Next slide, please. Oh, my EKG, what is it doing here? Why are we doing this? Oh, it's not my EKG, but it does show that there's a lot of variance in the security posture of participating companies. One of the metrics that we developed, we didn't develop it alone, it was actually developed in concert with PGP Corporation. Now they're part of Symantec. And basically, about 8 or 9 years ago, we came up with a metric called the Security Effectiveness Score, the SES. And what's interesting about this is that if you're really bad, in fact, you're the worst, you're going to be a -2. That means forget about it. You're out of business. You know, you're so bad from a security perspective. But if you're really good, you're going to be at a +2. Most companies are not even near those two extremes. But the fact is you want to see some variance. So you could say that some organizations are better than others in terms of their security posture. If you're interested in this metric, it takes about 15 minutes to complete. But you have to have good data, right? It's not that 15 minutes is all you need. You need to have people who are smart enough to respond to the questions. So it's a nice, fast, easy, good way to basically determine security posture, but it does have limitations, but it does seem to work pretty well. So it seems to be a good indicator. Anyway, what we find is that in this year, we have a whole bunch of organizations based on security posture. I'll answer questions right after, I promise.